The morning was fantastic. I'm going to try to explain our thinking. We started with the arc from fetal to adult health because the life course is an important place to begin when we're thinking about child and maternal health. Then we went into, of course, rounding out the sessions with stem cell and regenerative therapy because we have to think about ways to impact child health from the ground up. And I think a lot of the things that we learned about from that session are in that arena, firmly stamped in that arena. And now we're going to go into the session on accelerating innovation. One of the things that's really critical with taking research, doing research, is making sure that research actually realizes its potential in a setting that can scale to the population who needs the output from that research. And that's where accelerating innovation becomes critical. This is in the form of commercialization, of course, but in many other ways. And so the panelists that we're going to hear from today kind of run the gamut from drug design, drug development, rapid drug development in particular, getting things into testing, into validation, and then out and beyond to the bench side as quickly as possible to impact as many who need it. And also, we and others are thinking about paradigms like the one that's represented on this slide. This is something that my close colleague, David Stark, who's a pediatric neurologist, and I have been working on. We're thinking about how can we start to take advantage of ubiquitous machines, ubiquitous sensors, such as the one that I'm holding, or the ones that are probably in your pockets, iPads, iPhones, in order to be able to more passively acquire information, physiological signals even, in a continuous fashion to be able to build big data sets that provide us with the platform to test new models, new concepts, new paradigms, but also provide us with the capability of transforming that information, if it's validated, into a product, a clinical product, a usable commercial tool that can automatically be turned on at the flip of a switch. So, for example, ResearchKit, of course, is conceiving of new apps that enable us to gather big data sets faster in a crowdsourcing mechanism than we've ever been able to do before. Once we have that information, it may enable us to validate a model, and once we've understood that validation is sufficient, we can turn that app into something that turns into a tool that we can use in real life, and it can be used in a very ubiquitous fashion. So we think of things like Fitbit that's measuring physiological output from your body, movement patterns, exercise, and so forth. We and others have worked on how we can apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to understand immediately the presence or absence of a developmental delay in a child who looks like this one. Does this child have autism, or does this child have another developmental condition? This can be done on a phone, on an app. And there are things like glasses, which are now pulled off the market, but nevertheless represent an opportunity for us to think about how we can leverage things like Google Glass or other similar kinds of technologies to be able to simultaneously gather information in a continuous fashion, signals, using sensors that exist in these devices, like accelerometers and outward-facing cameras and so forth, and then translate that information into a validated model that we can then leverage for commercialization really rapidly. And so here it is in practice, and these are things that I won't talk about today. I'm just doing this as a preamble to the session, which will include a keynote from Dr. Alan Greene, who is among many other things, the chief medical officer for Scanadu. He's and I'll do this here, a renowned practicing pediatrician. Dr. Greene has been for a long time a leading authority on child health and wellness. He's the author of several books, including Raising Baby Greene and Feeding Baby Greene. He appears frequently in the media, including The Today Show, Good Morning America, The Dr. Oz Show, and therefore he's probably not uncomfortable with Martha Stewart's living room. And he is the founder of a pioneering website, DrGreene.com. He was named the Children's Health Hero of the Internet by Intel, and as I said, he's the chief medical officer for the device that's represented here within this paradigm that Dr. David Stark and I have been working on. And so I am extremely honored and delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Greene and to have him here as a keynote speaker. And I think without further ado, I'll have him come up, and then I'll come back up and talk more about the panel.
Thank you, Dennis. Good afternoon. Great to get to be with you, even in the after lunch session. I can't think of a more exciting time in the history of medicine. When it comes to the possibility for life-changing innovation, I can't think of an environment more ripe in history. I mean, if I could pick any time in history to go into medicine, to be involved in medicine, this would be the one. Now, we're seeing some of this innovation in places outside of medicine first. It's happening societally. For instance, just a few years ago, Uber didn't exist. It's only 6 years old. But according to Chris Sacca, it is now the largest transportation company in history. Bigger than the Dutch East India Company that was involved in the founding of our country. Bigger than the transcontinental railroads in Leland, Stanford. It's part of the reason that we're gathered here today and the transformation that brought in the United States. You know, one of the Bay Area airlines, United Airlines, is pretty big. And there's another pretty big airline, Continental, and they merged. And after merging, they are worth about $25 billion. Big company. But Uber is worth $41 billion, bigger than the combined airlines, booking more trips per day than anybody ever. And it's not because they own a fleet of planes. It's not because they have an amazing headquarters. It's not because they own a lot of stuff. They have used people, existing resources, data, software to create this magic that just sprung up out of nowhere, apparently. Airbnb didn't used to exist. More people will sleep at Airbnb tonight than every Hilton hotel and all their affiliates in the world. More people will sleep at Airbnb tonight than all the intercontinental hotels in the world, and those are the world's two largest hotel chains in history. And again, Airbnb didn't do it by having massive resources. They connected existing resources in a really unique and cool way using software and people together. Hidden sneak peek, spoiler alert, patients are the biggest underused resource in medicine. And we're talking about child and maternal health. Moms and their kids are the biggest underused resource in pediatrics. Airbnb, by the way, they don't just have rooms like hotels do. You can rent a whole house. You can stay in a castle, in a manor. You could stay in an igloo or a teepee. You could stay on a private island. They're thinking outside the box. And what I want to say today, essentially, is not just do a quick catalog of the tech that's out there right now. That'd be fun, but that's gone next year. I want to leave you with the idea that we are at the precipice of that kind of massive change in healthcare. Disruptive, the incumbent stuff, what we know right now, in 6 or 7 years, we'll see things as big, as changing, as world-changing as those things in pediatrics and in maternal health. So I want to start by jumping back just a little bit. Oh, my disclosures. Jumping back just a little bit to May 18th, 2011. And that evening, I wrote a little blog post, a quiet little blog post that didn't get much attention whatsoever, still on the website, our website. And again, it still hasn't gotten a lot of attention. On March 1st, it got 1 page view. March 2nd, it got 0. March 3rd, it got 0. First 14 days of March, it had a total of 3 page views. But then on March 15th, totally unknown reason, it had 305 page views. Not big, but it's interesting. Somebody found it, sent it to their friends. By March 31st, a couple days ago, it had 707,350 page views. Something happened. It got shared on Facebook. It had 64,354 likes on Facebook. Also on Google+, it had 21 thumbs up or pluses on Google+. That's not 21,000, it's just 21 total on Google+. It had 38,924 comments as of a couple of days ago. 2.2 million people saw this 4-year-old blog post on Facebook in March. And it's going still this week. This week, since Monday, it's had more than 2.8 million impressions on Twitter. So what is this about? I mean, we didn't do anything about this. So as of now, or as of March 13th, we had our first little bit of an uptick. It's basically about the concept of extrapolation and how we're in this gap right now between extrapolation and real data. In the particular context of this one, the FDA had just called together a joint meeting of a couple of their advisory panels about acetaminophen. They got together their pediatric advisory committee. They got together their over-the-counter drug advisory committee and had them come together to discuss changing the labels and dosing on acetaminophen because there had been a bunch of deaths, and including deaths in kids and young kids. And the question they were supposed to debate and talk about was, should we change the doses of infant and children's to be consistent levels, which the team voted they should do? Should they change the dosing to be by weight instead of by age, which the team voted they should do? And they're also asked, is it safe and does it work? And they concluded at the appropriate doses it's safe. It works great for lowering fever. But when they reviewed together all of the world's literature on pain relief in kids under 2, it didn't show any effect. They concluded there is no substantial or conclusive evidence that acetaminophen is efficacious in relieving pain in children from 6 months, which is how low they were dosing it, to 2 years of age. And they recommended that pain relief be taken off the label for acetaminophen. Now, the total 10 studies that have been done were not that good. They were really small numbers. It might be 20 kids. The endpoints weren't great. Essentially, it was unanswered. And so some people on the panel said, why don't we just extrapolate? We know it works in older kids. We know it works in adults. Why don't we just assume it works in kids? So then they brought out the FDA files on extrapolation. It turns out there have been 375 times where they had tried to do that, where they looked at something that worked in older kids, and we assume it's going to work in younger kids. And by the way, well, and what they found was of the 375 cases, when they went and filled in the data later, they were wrong 75 times. 20% of the time they were clear-cut wrong, and notably decongestants in kids. People used to think it worked in teens. Of course, it's going to work in a kid under 6. It doesn't. Another one was proton pump inhibitors for reflux. We knew it worked in older kids. The thought was it would work for colicky babies who have reflux, and it was given out so much in pediatrics, but it didn't work. When the data came, it didn't work. And so this group of scientists decided that since extrapolation is not a valid way to tell what's going to work for babies, and you know, what could it hurt? Well, the answer is it could hurt, right? Acetaminophen, most people aren't aware of it, but is the largest cause of overdoses, the largest cause of overdose deaths of any drug product in the company. It's the most used ingredient in medications. It's in over 600 different products overall. In the US, among adults, 23% of all adults in any given week take acetaminophen. For some reason, it's used a lot. It's the most common one of the most commonly used drugs in kids, and we don't know how well it works. Extrapolation. So just recently, ResearchKit, you've heard about today, was released, and I love this quote from here. ResearchKit did in 24 hours what would normally take 50 medical centers a year. And what they did is they recruited, in the first 24 hours, 10,000 people into a cardiovascular health study. Dramatic. Well, in all the discussions of this Tylenol thing, what the parents were saying was, hey, we could all work together and we could figure out if it works. One woman who was a nurse said, I've got a baby at home who's got a G-tube on a pulse ox, and I know that when I give my baby acetaminophen, when I give them Tylenol, that the pulse ox goes up, the oxygenation goes up, the heart rate goes down, even when there's no fever. So I know for my baby this works. Imagine if we did that with 1,000 babies or 10,000 babies. We could answer the question in one day. We could answer the question in a day. Now, one of the nurses in my office said, but you know, if we start doing that, some of the data is not going to be that clean. There's bias. There's selection bias. People who own iPhones are different than the other people. And she's absolutely right. But we'll still know a lot more than we've ever known before, and we'll get better and better in looking at the data. And by the way, extrapolation is not just about older kids to babies, we extrapolate a lot of data in the literature still from white men in the middle of life and say it works for women, or works for pregnant women, or works for seniors, or is safe for one of those groups. We're now at a time in history where we can get real answers to real questions. And one of the companies you heard about that I'm working with, Scanadu, is trying to gather that kind of data. We'll take a deep dive into people's health. And just one quick example, this is a Scanadu Scout. It's an investigational device. It was crowdsourced. It came from the people in funding and in design and what they wanted. And you just touch it to the forehead, and on your smartphone, it shows your blood pressure and your heart rate and your oxygen level, and it does your vitals for you in a matter of seconds. But with tools like that and many, many other tools that exist in the world today, where we can combine. I was just on a panel recently, a couple weeks ago, with a woman who was the founder of 23andMe, a genetics company, the world's first consumer genotype company, and a founder of MuBiome, who was the founder of a company that's sequencing, not just culturing, the microbiome, and founder of Scanadu, who is doing phenotype work, trying to figure out what's actually happening in a person's body today. And if you put those strands together, if we know what somebody's genotype, and if it's a kid and we can't get to it, know at least what their parents' DNA is, and put that together with their lab data, what's going on in their life, we can answer so many questions so quickly. Blood pressure is a really good one to tackle. A really good example of this. The UN recently said, the WHO, that this is the largest single underlying cause of death in humans, and therefore one of our most important public health problems. It leads to, if you can fix blood pressure, it leads to longer heart health, longer brain health, longer sexual function health. And blood pressure is an issue in kids. That when I started in pediatrics, essentially no kids had high blood pressure, and today millions of kids do, and we know almost nothing about what to do for it. What are the effects of different things in them? And to be able to track that easily in them, we can again answer questions. One cool thing you should be aware of in terms of answering questions is there's a new company by the woman who founded 23andMe called We Are Curious. And the website is wearecurious with the dot right before the last us. wearecurie.us. And the idea behind it is a platform where people can ask a question and then figure out how to put together this research trial together. What do we all want to answer? Let's just do it. Let's track it at home and figure it out. This is a picture of me with Kevin Kelly, who's a dear friend, and once we were on a walk a number of years ago, I was tracking a lot about myself. On this one, I was tracking my temperature curves. On a previous one, I'd done over 100 blood tests on myself to try to learn how switching from conventional to organic food might impact my health. And it was a pretty cool story for another time. But on this walk over the Pacific Ocean, we were talking about this, and he had the perception that, this is an idea of learning about yourself and tracking yourself. We should, and the idea emerged during this conversation to call this thing called quantified self, that we would be able to quantify what's happening in our bodies. And now quantified self is a big deal. He went on to found the movement and get it started in his own home. And all around the world, some people are doing it. That movement reminds me of the homebrewed computer movement many years ago. It's a bunch of Harvard hobbyists and geeks who are into this, and now computers are everywhere. They're embedded in our lives, they're embedded in our coffee makers, they're embedded in our phones. Our phones are computers. And I think this idea of getting health data about ourselves, right now the quantified selfers are kind of our own unique group. But soon it's going to be embedded everywhere. And that means we're going to get answers to questions like never before. One little app I carry around with me, is called Fog of the World. It's just for fun. The entire globe map is there. It's all covered in fog. Every place I go, it becomes clear. So I can just go back and see all the spots I've traveled. I can see where I walked on the streets of Paris. This is right here on the Stanford campus. The dot in the center is right about where we are today. And you can see, even on that screen, most of it's not clear. It's just a little bit, even though I feel like I hear a ton, most of it's not clear. I've been to 0.000020% of the world so far. And most of our research studies have been that way. There's just a little tiny bit of the fog is uncovered. But imagine if we connect everybody together in this quest to understand human health, the whole game changes. If there's 100 million people on fog, it's a lot more of the world that's just instantly uncovered. The picture I have right now is that, imagine this room completely dark and just a few green lasers that are pointed through. They're like a high-quality research study. And if you're not extrapolating, they tell you just a little bit about a small segment of what's going on in this room. But we're at the brink right now of turning the lights on, in a dark room and understanding human health in ways we never had before. So I want to talk briefly about the idea of user-oriented collaborative medicine. And we've talked so far about research. This is one of the things I call this, or participatory medicine. By the way, if you're not part of the Society for Participatory Medicine, I urge you to join. It's super cheap, and it's people who are thinking this way. But user-oriented collaborative medicine is also about care, not just about research. And just backing up very quickly, I was in private practice up in San Mateo, had a great little practice, loved it. It was typical. It was this idyllic thing. But in the mid-90s, managed care steamrolled through, experimenting with how to squeeze the most value out of the system, started seeing more and more families at a time, and they started complaining. So I talked with a number of other older and wiser pediatricians and said, what can we do to make this better? I think what we should do is get the families together and ask them and brainstorm together. And they said, do not do that. If you talk to families, two bad things will happen. One is that they will, by naming the problem, it'll seem more severe than it really is. And two, that anything they come up with will not be practical. It's going to just exhaust you more. So I got the families together at night in these secret meetings and said, okay, we all have a problem. I'm exhausted, you're exhausted, you hate them at the time we get together. And people say that we can't come up with the good solutions together, but we'll all talk together, what works for me, what works for you, what can we do? And they suggested that I start a website. And my wife built it, who's here. And I started answering a question every day for the practice. But it turned out, by happenstance, by listening to the patients and working with them, it ended up being really innovative. It was called by the AMA the pioneer website in the world, a physician website in the world, answering questions online, and very quickly spread around the world. But the key thing is it came from listening to patients. And the other key thing about it is I was able to have we've had over 90 million people come to this site before this little blurb happened, because it's an unadvertised site, but it's because it's really listening to what people want and they build. And it's not a business, it's just a service to the world. When I was a kid, I should say, I think of health largely as a navigation problem. That we want to know where we are right now. We want to know how healthy we are. And that's a diagnosis or a health assessment or a well-child visit. We want to know where we want to get, how, normal development, building bones to last for a lifetime, or well from the cancer that we have. And we want to know how to get from here to there, what we need along the way. So health very much, I think, of deeply as a navigation issue. When I was a kid, the way the navigation worked was we would go to the AAA office, and they would pull out these paper maps and then highlight for us the route we were supposed to take. And it was kind of fun. I remember the trips to go and see where we were going to go on vacation, and where to stop along the way was even sometimes highlighted. Much of medicine is still in the paper map, go to the office and get a highlighted handout version of health. We're still there. My wife recently was in the ER. She had a concussion, and she left with a paper handout highlighted. It was called adult head injury minor, and it was not even the right handout, and they have no idea how she's doing now. And today, of course, we live with GPS, and it has changed our whole way of getting around. And Google is now in the 9th edition, I believe, of Google Maps, is one of those. And it has in there, you can make restaurant reservations from your map. Not only know what restaurants are and how they're rated, but get the table you want. And you can get Uber right there from the map if you want to get from here to there someplace. It's this turn-by-turn, real-time, where you are responding to what's happening in your life, and that's where medicine is heading. If you want to innovate towards GPS and the next iterations of GPS. Let's leave the paper age and move to the satellite age. And in particular, things to look for in care is you want care that is continuous. The old model of just people come in that I liked back in the early 90s is really pretty broken. You'd only see kids, 20 minutes a year if they're healthy, or every 2 years after kindergarten. And now build towards ways to be in touch. In my practice now, which I love, the office visit is no longer the key part of the practice. I do office visits. In fact, I did a house call on the way here. But the amount of touches that we have between families and me electronically and by phone and all kinds of other ways absolutely dwarfs the office visit. The office visit is something of a dinosaur. It's important, but it's not the centerpiece anymore. Continuous contextual. We need to be embedded in people's lives where they're making their health decisions, at the schools, at the parks, wherever the kids are. Comprehensive. Any real medical issue is not going to be just about a medicine you take, but it has to do with, and just like any trip on Google isn't just about the road, it's about the gas stations and the restaurants and everything else that's embedded in life. Collaborative, working together. Closed-looped. The cool thing is when we have an intervention, see how it works, capture that data, connect with this big research platform, all of a sudden research and care are no longer separate. When we get that, where research and care are no longer separate, that's when the lights start coming on. HealthLoop, by the way, is a company that's doing that in a really cool way. Crowdsourced, getting parents on board with care as well as research, and calculable, setting up our processes so we can gather data and learn and iterate and learn and iterate and learn and iterate. One other thing I want to tell you, we've talked about research, we've talked about care just a little bit, and our practice, the DNA is user-oriented. We're always asking families, if you could wave a magic wand to make this any way you want, what would it look like, and how could we possibly get from here to there? And we have needs, you have needs, let's figure out what we can do realistically. But not just research, not just care, but the other pillar is public health. And I want to tell you about a public health story that was completely not possible a few years ago. And I was very concerned about about the childhood obesity epidemic, and particularly looking really early in life, way before supersized meals, way before school lunch problems, because in the first year, up to 30% of our kids already have excess fat cells and altered metabolisms. So what's going on that we could alter before that? And when I looked closely at that, the thing that I saw was the #1 source of food calories in the US for decades has been super processed white flour. We call it white rice cereal. And it was the standard. It's what everybody was recommending. And decided if we could just alter that one little thing, if we could erase that mistake, white out that mistake, and just let every child's first grain be a whole grain, let every child's first food be a whole food, that would be a step forward and would get people thinking about food from the start, instead of just going on this treadmill towards the American kid food culture. So the way we did this, it was a super tiny team. My wife and I decided to do that. We worked with a few other people, Richard Sachs and Karen, and who did this beautiful drawing. And but it was it was a handful of people working together with almost zero budget. And what we decided to do was to try to use a few platforms. One was social media. And we looked around on existing social media, 2011. This was a year that little article got nothing back at the beginning. And found 5 places where most parenting social media was coming from. There's a group in Boston called ISIS, and one in Dallas called Metro Moms, and one in New York called Big City Moms. And decided to go and visit each of these 5 places and do a talk with the parents about whiteout, this idea, and ask them to help spread the word. So did that. Medscape was involved. They did a survey of doctors at the beginning of 2011 before this campaign and found among pediatricians in the US, far and away, in a multiple choice, would you recommend for a baby white rice cereal, whole grain cereal, vegetable, fruit, egg, meat, or other? White rice cereal was far and away the #1 choice, way more than anything else. So we talked to the parents, asked them to spread the word, asked them to ask their doctors about the idea of doing whole grain cereal. And then partway through, when the parents had been doing it, and it got picked up in the traditional media some, it was on a full-page story in USA Today, and it was on Good Morning America, but it was mostly the social stuff that was happening. And then wrote an article to physicians explaining all the literature about, which I won't go into today, why I think this is a good idea and how we can do it. And it won't cost a dime. It's a simple thing for us to do. And it became, on the Medscape platform where physicians gather, the #1 story read in Children's Health for the entire year of 2011. And afterwards, Medscape did a survey of physicians. More than 12,000 physicians responded, and 93% said they would not recommend white rice cereal for babies. Massive change, public health effort in 1 year that you couldn't do the traditional way. The committees would still be going. If we were, in fact, they are in some groups that are looking at making this change officially. But you can do real change by just networking together people with a little bit of technology. So extrapolation, I think that we're hopefully, when it comes, so much of women and children's health has been extrapolated from adults. And we're at a time and at a place where before we give medicines to people, we can figure out how they really work. And not just, does it relieve pain or not, but you can figure out for which baby it's likely to work. And you can figure out, heel stick pain is real different than teething pain, which is different than otitis media with an inflamed tympanic membrane. And which of those does it work better for? And what solutions work better for different? We can turn the lights on. So anyway, that's why I'm so excited about innovation right now. I hope that we get to the spot where in academics, it's no longer publish or perish, but innovate or perish. It's uncover fog or perish. And thank you all for being here for accelerating innovation in children and maternal health.